Molly Binetti, welcome back to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Rob, as always a pleasure.
One of the few people, I suppose that percentage of people is actually growing now because of the in-person conferences, but few people I've actually, who's been on the podcast, I've actually met in person. So it's a pleasure to kind of get you back on, but also, have a bit more knowledge about you and things like that, given that you spoke at Pitt. So it's great to have you back on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Would you, if anyone hasn't listened to the first episode we did, they should do for one. But would you mind just giving us a bit of a quick bio on you? Where are you? Where have you been? What are you doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. By title, I'm the director of women's basketball performance at the University of South Carolina. So I'm directly responsible for all things performance related to our women's basketball team, and I'm in my seventh season here. After spending 4 years at the University of Louisville, where I worked with a few more sports. I worked with basketball, not soccer, softball, tennis, and volleyball as well. And then I really have spent my entire career in Division I college athletics. So I spent my first year at Purdue University back in 2013, 2014. I worked with an array of sports, and all throughout undergrad and grad school as well too. I've probably worked with every Division I sport there is in some capacity, but have kind of narrowed my way and found my way into the world of basketball, which I love and have really grasped the last 7 years of my life. So a lot of different experiences within that, but that's where a little bit of Cliff Notes version of how I got to where I am.
Forgive my geographical knowledge of the US. Where's Purdue?
It's in Indiana, middle of
Okay.
nowhere,
Okay.
Indiana. Yeah. It's maybe 2 hours south of Chicago.
Okay.
If you're familiar with the Midwest at all. But yeah, pretty much a very small college town.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you've downplayed the achievements that you and the rest of the team have had over the last few years. For anyone that's not aware, which may be a lot, like give us a bit of a rundown of the achievements that you've had at the university where you're at over the last few years. Don't be modest either.
Yeah. Well, my boss is, I would say, not arguably, but maybe to some arguably, the one of the most decorated basketball coaches of all time, Dawn Staley. Um, we over the past this is year 7, but over the past 6 years, have made it to 4 straight Final Fours. We've won 2 out of the last 3 national championships. Um, if it weren't for COVID, could have been one more, but we are destined for another one. But obviously, we've had a ton of success. Arguably maybe the most successful college program over the last decade for sure. And really, I think we've kind of set the standard for what women's basketball should be. But I think even just within our really performance ecosystem and performance environment that we've created here, I think we are kind of becoming the model for not just wins, obviously, but player health, player availability, some of our injury numbers, and just obviously the record and wins speak for themselves. So I think have been building something really special here in Columbia since Coach Staley got here, and then really in particular these last 6, 7 years have been nothing short of pretty incredible of what we've been able to do as a program.
Did she come to the University of South Carolina with an incredible record? Or has she built that kind of
Uh,
reputation
she
there?
Yeah, she's really built. I mean, she's a Hall of Fame player, so she really had a stellar college and professional career, and really didn't want to be a coach. But she's from Philly. She took her first coaching job at Temple in Philly, and then didn't spend a long time there before she got recruited to South Carolina. And this is it's either 16 or 17 for her. I want to say it's 17. I think 2008. And I mean, South Carolina was a nothing program. There was no record of success before she got here, and she's really built it to the powerhouse that it is now. I mean, from nobody in the stands to now we sell out, 18,000 people on a pretty consistent basis. So she she had a great career as a coach or as a player, and has really uh, kind of set the bar as a coach as well.
18,000.
18,000.
Jeez.
We had a game yesterday, sell out 18,000. It's
Wow,
pretty incredible.
that is incredible.
We've
Yeah.
uh we've led the attendant we've led the country in attendance the last 10 years. So total average attendance.
I mean, as a Brit, like we don't get the college thing. Like it just doesn't comprehend because it's just a completely different system. But to have 18,000 is wild. Yeah, incredible.
Yes, yes.
Right, let's get into it. So you, like I mentioned right at the start, you spoke at the Speed conference at Pitt in the summer, and I want to kind of revisit some of the themes that you spoke about. But one of the things that I wanted to start with was your training philosophy, and I think that will guide us through this conversation as well. Would you mind just giving us and you mentioned the Cliff Notes, but a bit of an overview of your training philosophy? So I think it was really interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I loved it, as I told you.
Yeah. It's something that's really evolved over my career. I think when we're indoctrinated in strength and conditioning, we're really only taught about learning how to train, building these really robust and specific training programs, and learning about getting athletes bigger, faster, and stronger, and what development looks like. And I think that view has really changed for me, especially since I've come to South Carolina, and you really get to go dive deep into one sport, where this view of development isn't just about bigger, faster, stronger anymore. I think of development as a very holistic approach. Obviously, the physical aspect is a piece of that. There's a mental and emotional piece of that as well, too. We're working with 18 to 22-year-olds. We're trying to help develop them as people. We're trying to help develop them into pros. When I think about the main thing for our program is we want to win and we want to develop pros. Those are the two things. And so everything that I do, or everything that we do, really, no matter what position or role we're in, it should be to help keep the main thing, which is we want to keep them healthy and help them play basketball at a higher level. And if what we're doing is not directly helping them play basketball better, then I don't really understand why we're doing it. So now when I think about development, the mental and emotional aspect is a piece, but the physical aspect is more so how do we blend their skill with helping them develop their athleticism? Because ultimately, skill is always going to be the number one factor in sport, regardless of if it's basketball, soccer, volleyball. Like, skill is the most important thing. So how can we use the weight room to help develop their skill, or help them showcase their skill? And then when you think about athleticism, it's not just getting somebody stronger. It's not just helping them jump higher or run faster. It's really, you think about the most athletic people are the best movers. Like, we've got to develop really good movers. And the best movers are really rhythmic, they're coordinated, they're fluid. There's a smoothness about them. And yes, we know that force and power and those elastic qualities are a piece of the puzzle, but they're only a small piece, because if they're getting stronger and they're getting more powerful and they're getting faster, but it's not equating to them being a better basketball player, then there's a piece that's missing, right? And so I think as I've evolved in my career, I've worked with some of the best players, not just in college, but in the world. They're not the biggest, they're not the fastest, and they're not the strongest. So then what actually matters? Maybe those things don't matter as much. And so my perspective on that has changed. And then I think in our environment, in the college environment, you have a really unique opportunity to help develop people and help them grow and mature and be a pro, whether that's in basketball or not, right? And so I think I look at the landscape for college basketball players, like every part of their day is basically pre-planned out for them. They're told where to be, when to be there, what they got to wear. Like, every part of their day, they're told what to do. And so inherently, basketball players don't really love the weight room. They don't love to train that much. You might get one out of a group of 12 or 13. And so what I've been met with resistance and had struggles with along the way is really getting athletes to buy in to what we're doing and engage with their training and actually want to be here. And so the way that I approach it is, and their development, is by creating a partnership. Like, I don't want this to just be another place where you come in and you're told what to do and I just give you your training program and you do it and you get on with your day. Like, I want you to be involved in that process. And I want you to actually want to be in this environment. I want it to be an environment where you feel like you have a say over your own development and you have autonomy. I want you to feel good about what you're doing, and I want you to feel connected to what you're doing. I want you to feel connected to me and with your teammates. So it's really creating that environment where you get the most out of your athletes. And I take the page from self-determination theory of like motivation, because I think that's our biggest complaint as as strength coaches in college is like our athletes aren't motivated or they're lazy or whatever it is. That's not really the case. They just don't really care about what we care about. So like, how can we create an environment where they get to have choices, where they feel competent in what they're doing, and then there's also a connection between the people and what they're doing, and so they can really take ownership of their development and they understand the process, so that when they leave here, they're a pro. They know what works for them. They know what doesn't work. They know what they like, they don't like, and it's not something that they dread anymore. It's something that they know is a valuable tool. So it's kind of a broader scale approach to like how I view development from like a physical standpoint and like actually helping them play basketball, but then also from a development standpoint of like how are we helping them become pros, and then how are we helping them get actually more out of training because they care about what they're doing. And I found that when you involve them and it's an individual process and partnership like that, the results that you get are exponentially better than what they would be if you just came in, gave them a sheet of paper and said, here you go, like this is your training for today.
Love it.
A lot of different tangents you can go there, a lot of different layers to that, but
so good, so good. So we'll get into the kind of what you actually do from a physical perspective, which people might expect to hear from, which we'll definitely get to. But in terms of involving the athlete in the process, how are you giving them choices? What does that actually look from a day to day to actually provide those choices? And the competence piece, how will you enable them to feel competent? And that kind of links to a next point that I'll make in the future, which is a video that you had in your presentation, which was, I think she was doing some sort of like overhead squat, one of the girls. I can't remember which one it was.
yes,
She was
yep.
all over the shop, which was a great example.
Yes.
So and that's probably someone that didn't want to be in the gym because they don't feel competent. So yeah, how do you do those choices and competent piece?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think the process for me starts, before I even start training is I just have a conversation with them and I want to understand kind of what their perspective is on the weight room in general and ask them questions about training. Like, what do you like? What do you don't like? What are things that you feel like help you? What do you feel like doesn't help you? And even just those basic questions can give you an idea of exercise selection, right? Like, for example, I remember I had a player who's in the WNBA now and she absolutely hated trap bar. And while like we think trap bar is a pretty like user-friendly exercise, most people can do it, right? It's pretty safe, it's pretty effective. Like she absolutely hated it. So why am I going to make her trap bar deadlift just because I think everybody else is trap bar deadlifting? So like even just a small replacement like that goes a long way in terms of like this athlete's like, oh, she's listening to me, or like, oh, she's actually taking into consideration what I said. And when you do that, even just that small change, it's like putting in a deposit and you're building trust. And the more of those deposits you have in that trust, then you can go deeper into individualizing things for them. And, part of it too, I think, is just trial and error. Like when I get an athlete in, also one of my main goals is I wanted to introduce them to as many movement variations as possible, throwing them through a bunch of different things. And I also want to see what looks good, what feels good for them. And I'm asking them feedback throughout that process too of like, hey, what'd you like? Which one didn't feel good? Did something feel better than the rest? And then just sort of that feedback loop of, okay, like I'm going to put that exercise, maybe those exercises aside. We're going to stick with this for right now and see and develop that. So I think asking questions is really important. And then just having them try some things out. So an example, in a training session, maybe it's a day that we're actually working on some strength, and that's for sake of simplicity, or doing a squat or a lower body, let's say lower body strength exercise. I'm going to let them choose what they want to do. For like in season right now, tomorrow we'll do a heavier lower body day, and they can choose what they want to do. That could be, they could squat any way they want to squat. They could do a leg press if they want a leg press. They could do a pitch shark belt squat. I don't really care because the goal is really just load. You got to load the system. So I really don't care what they choose. And sometimes it changes week to week for them too. And I just kind of create like these almost like libraries for each player of like taking notes of things that go well, things they like, things they don't like, and kind of building our base through that. And then sometimes it's as simple as at the end of the workout, hey, you get to choose what you want to finish with today. And then I just take note of what they choose. Like I've got some players that just at the end of every workout, they're going to go to the mirror and they're going to do bicep curls. I don't care. Does it hurt? It's not hurting anything. Like that's what they want to do. So sure, like it's not harming anything. But I think the key is like when you give choices and you let them choose, like you've got to let them choose, and you can't be like, oh no, no, you can't do that. Or like just because you think it might not make sense, you got to let them actually choose and like have that freedom. Because when you do, again, the that trust and everything builds. So those are some small examples, and I think that second piece of that question of helping them feel competent is also introducing them to a lot of different things and sort of seeing what looks good and what doesn't and what they feel comfortable with. Even if you think they should be doing X, Y, or Z, like, and they feel comfortable doing, whatever the opposite choice is, like, start there, let them build some confidence with it. And then I think it's just about problem solving, finding ways you can add constraints or you just manipulate the movement to set them up for success. Like basketball players are long, like they're like no torso, all limbs. Like they traditionally are not good with barbell movements. So like I would say, I can't remember the last time, honestly, we used a barbell like for a major movement, maybe a landmine, but like from a squatting perspective or anything, like we really don't do that. So it's really about problem solving for each athlete and what they feel the best with. And that just requires us sort of taking a step back from that control that we want to have and just kind of having some humility and asking them and like including them and admitting that sometimes we don't know necessarily what's best. And when you involve them and let them choose, like it's a win-win. Like they pick something they like and that they're going to work hard at. It's something that works well and is suited well for that athlete. And then you're going to get more out of them than you would if you're just making them do something that you had planned because it makes sense in your head.
How difficult has that been for you? Like as S&C coaches, we like structure. We like an Excel sheet, back squat every week, and it goes up and to the right. Like that's like
Yeah.
that, traditionally, that's all that matters. So how have you been able to get the buy-in from people around you, which I guess has again developed over time, and as well as your philosophy developing over time, to be a bit looser on that and not be obsessed with that tracking, the Excel spreadsheet, the weight's got to go up, the height's got to go up. Like how do
Yep.
you get your head around that, and then I suppose deliver that to the people that are asking those type of questions as well?
Yeah.
Did they ask those type of
I'm all,
questions?
yeah. Yeah. It's a really good question. I think I'm in an environment that's maybe the exception to the rule, whereas like,
Okay.
my head coach doesn't, I don't want to say she doesn't care because she does care, but she doesn't want to see updated performance reports. She doesn't want to see any analytics. She doesn't want to see any of that because what she cares about is are athletes healthy and are they playing basketball the way that they need to play basketball? And are they improving? So I don't need to report to her with, hey, so and so. If I tell her, hey, so and so jumped 5 inches higher than she did last fall, but like they're not producing or doing what they need to do on the court, she's going to be like, okay, that's great, but we need her to do X, Y, or Z. Um, and I think for me, and I think as coaches, right, we do crave control. And I think there is very much still ego involvement with it. We like to see those numbers improve. And don't get me wrong, like there are things that we do track, and there's certain things I include in our list where but like as a whole, for a general rule, like I'm not testing max strength. I don't have these perfect spreadsheets. I don't have any of that. Um, so I've become okay with more so this organized chaos and this little bit more non-traditional weight room environment because our players are healthy, our players are winning, our players are becoming pros, our players are seeing improvement throughout their time here. Like numbers are still increasing, but that's not my primary focus because it doesn't matter if they're improving in here if they're not winning and they're not healthy. Um, and that those things, the winning and the healthy piece, is not just because of the weight room. Like it takes to have the success that we've had and the player availability that we have, it takes every single person on our staff doing their jobs at an extremely high level. But I think what makes it all tick are the relationships, the way that we collaborate as a staff, but also our relationships that we have with our players and their involvement in their own development here. And that's both in the weight room, that's on the court, and how Coach Staley approaches it. That's how we approach rehab and anything that we need to do on the medical front. And it's just like, I think the reality of it in college athletics, you can't plan out this perfect periodization model. You can't plan out this perfect training program because the amount of variables that change on a daily basis are insane. So you've got to be able to have a much broader understanding of what you're doing and where you're trying to go. And yes, like the training principles that you're sort of abiding by at each time of the year and what you want to achieve, like you've got to have a really strong understanding of that. But when you do, the way that you get there can be super flexible and it's going to change every single day. And so giving them autonomy, giving them ranges of reps or sets, giving them options for certain exercises to hit certain qualities. Like it doesn't matter what exercise you choose. As long as, like, if you're within that structure and you're fitting in within that framework, like you're still going to target what you want to target. But now you are allowing for a little bit more flexibility, and then you're not beating your head against the wall because athlete A is not doing what you want them to do, and you're not getting the perfect results that you think you're going to get. It's just the reality of it. It's messy, it's chaotic, and we've got to just be able to think, again, just relinquish some of that control. And part of it is like kind of taking a step back of like, okay, like we know what we do is important, but them squatting 300 pounds or deadlifting whatever, or benching whatever, it doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things.
You've talked about availability and keeping the girls healthy. Give us some stats. You mentioned at the start around player availability and the health being right up there with regard to records in the league.
Yeah. Since I've been here the last 7 years, we've lost 20 games total, and 10 of those came in my first year. We did lose a game this year, which is tough. But injury-wise, we have over 98% player availability rate. You know, I look at, we unfortunately just had one about earlier this month, but that is the third season-ending injury that we've had in 7 years. We've had 2 ACLs and we had an Achilles. 2 of those came in 2021. This one obviously just happened a couple weeks ago. But out of a total of almost, I think it's just over 2,700 game opportunities, there have been under 60 games missed total amongst every player that's come through our program the past six and a half years. So it's really, I mean, when you hear everywhere right now, there's an epidemic in injuries, especially in basketball and women's college basketball in particular. We've been really fortunate to be one of the teams that have been the healthiest. And I think because of that is why we've won as many games as we've had.
I know this is a difficult question to answer, but if there was like a top 3 reasons that you think that that's been the case, some maybe you, some maybe the people, some maybe the universe, but what's the top 3 you think?
Yeah, I think it starts at the top with our head coach. I think when I listen to other people in our profession and their situations, we have a head coach that really understands it. There's never a period of time where our athletes are just pounded into the ground in terms of the volume that they're doing. The amount of time that we spend practicing is minimal compared to many other programs that I hear about. And she understands the importance of recovery, understands the importance of what I do and what Craig, our athletic trainer, does. And so there's never a period of time where like our athletes are just going 3-4 hours every day and they're just running to the ground, where like the amount of volume and intensity that they're doing is just too much. So it starts there with, I just think our overall, like we go hard, but we are never going so much that we really have to drastically change what we're doing on a daily basis. I think the second piece of that is the people that are in this building and our ability to make decisions based on the information that we have for certain players. And again, that starts from the top and our coaching staff and their willingness to be open to Craig and I's recommendations, if we have any, um, their willingness to like just be really fluid in our environment and the relationships that we have with each other, to be honest and have hard conversations if we have to have hard conversations, and just do what we have to do to keep our players on the court for as much or as little as we need to keep them there on game day. Like, we're able to make those decisions really well, and we work really well in sync with each other. And because we have those relationships with our players and we allow them to have some say in things, like, they trust us and they're also honest with us. So we know, like, when an athlete's like actually dealing with something that we need to be mindful of, or because sometimes athletes BS both ways, right? Um, I mean, the third piece, like, there's there is some aspect of luck in there, right? I don't know if that is the final third and final piece, but because we know that sometimes things just happen, and but I think just how we kind of make it all work within our environment, and then like we do something. I don't know. Those are my top two. I'm struggling on the third one.
Molly, I'll ask you just to lead you, see if this is kind of is one thing. The variation. Do you think the variation aspect, and you're not super structured in what you do? Like you said a couple of times already, you're exposing these girls to as many different movements as possible. And I think I don't want to misquote the Bouchek Snyder saying that variation is
Yes.
the mother of injury prevention, and that came to me straight
Yes.
away. Do you think that could be the third,
Yes.
or top five anyway?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Thank you for uh, turning that light on. Yes, I do. I do think there is an aspect to the way that we train in here and what we do, and the variation, and just sort of the maybe non-traditional approach. There's not a lot of monotony in what we do at all. The way that we train is not just lifting weights, being stationary, even just jumping stationary. Like, we add an element of variety and kind of flavor to everything that we do. And we also train in a way that prepares them for kind of the ugliness and chaotic nature of sport. Um, Jumping and landing in unfavorable positions, even just basic strength movements, adding variety and a lot of the repetition without repetition approach of just doing things differently, and not just doing the same thing time and time again. I do think there is an element of, and I loved that quote from Boo. Um, and I think sometimes I almost like discredit it, and I almost discredit like what we do. Because to me, it's like just normal now, and it sort of like seems like common sense to me, but I also know it is not the norm, and it's not the way that people approach it. But um, we train we train every day that we practice. So in season, we're still training 4 days a week as well too. And obviously, what that looks like changes for different players and at times of the year. But I think the way that we work on our bodies, the way that we train our bodies, definitely definitely plays a key role in that too.
Just going back to that video that was in your presentation of the girl who'd just come in, and you listed her kind of stats and the achievements that she's got after then, and that was as long as your arm after then, but who was overhead squatting, who was kind of figuring it out slowly but surely. In
Yeah.
terms of assessments, what do you get the girls to do to give you a bit more of a picture of what you're receiving coming into the program?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to really come from a place where we did a lot of really formal assessments, and I think since coming to South Carolina, I've sort of taken pieces from that and just sort of made my own, maybe informal assessment protocol. And really, from a movement standpoint, like, I just want to see them sort of perform basic movements, whether it's a body weight squat, overhead squat. Can they do a lunge? I mean, you'd be surprised how many really struggle with a body weight lunge, and they're like some of the most elite basketball players in the world, right? Can they do a push up? Can they hold a plank? Can they just step off a box and land on two legs or on one leg? And So I just want to see. I take notes on it. I'll take video of it too so I can go back and watch. But I also use just our beginning training sessions too to expose them to a lot of different movement patterns and just see how they do with them. And again, just sort of taking notes. I take a lot of videos of our players as well too. And then I guess maybe from a more formal standpoint, well, most of the assessment and any just testing that we do in general comes in the form of just jumping and sprinting. So we'll go through an array of jump protocols. We do have force play, so we'll just do a basic counter movement jump, hands on hips. And besides that, we also have a just jump mat, and I'll kind of take them through a variety of jumps. We'll do an approach jump, so a jump with arm swing. I want to see what that looks like. We'll do a single leg vertical jump as well, just where you jump on one leg or off one leg as high as you can and land on two. I just want to see purely from a force and power standpoint, what does right to left look like? And then we'll also do the four jump, the repeat jump on two legs, and we'll do that on one leg as well too. So I want to look at their average jump height, but I also want to look at their ground contact time as well too, and just look at what are they like from an elastic standpoint. We will also do an approach jump with a target. So we have a vertec. We also have these various blocks hanging in our weight room in our turf space of, I think it starts at 9 feet and then 9, 6, 10 feet. It goes all the way up to 12 or 13. So we'll do that in the weight room, but we'll also use the vertec too because I want to see how high they can touch. And then we'll do a long jump too. I want to look at their horizontal power. That and then a three-quarter court sprint are basically all we do from a testing standpoint. But I feel like just with looking at basic movement and then really kind of breaking down each of those jumps, you can get a pretty good idea of one, their strength level, and just watching them. I think the eye test is huge in terms of how they take off, how they land, all of those things. And you can get a really good idea of what qualities they possess, what qualities they need to work on, and from a training standpoint, like what's our lowest hanging fruit. So it's worked for us. I know it's not perfect, but it gives me a really good starting point from a training perspective of where we've got to go. And then I think, um, one thing, like we really don't test max strength. I have before
Shocking.
in some of my early,
Shocking.
I know, we don't back squat, we don't do max trap bar. Every once we'll bench every once in a while, mostly because our players like to bench. So
Mhm.
we've done that. Um, but what I've just found is that like basketball players, they just need to be loaded. Like the system needs load. It doesn't really matter how in the form that it comes in. And if I saw a stronger correlation between our best basketball players and how strong they were in the weight room, if there was a stronger correlation there, I would probably do it more. But the fact is that it hasn't shown me that it matters all that much. Our best players are not the biggest, they're not the strongest, and they're not the fastest. They kind of usually are in the middle of the pack. And I think in my presentation, I sort of put the players that we get into three sort of categories. And I'd say 80% of the players that we get are super, super high skill level and very average athletically, like very average movers, average strength, average jumping, like nothing spectacular at all. And then you've got another 10% that is really, really high athleticism and just average skill level, just sort of like scratching the surface on what they can do skill wise. And then the last 10% is a super, super high skill level and really high athleticism too. Um, we've got a player on our team right now who even came in as a freshman, Malaysia Full Wiley. Like she is a walking highlight reel, but super, super high skill level and just off the charts athletically. And I think most people think that's what we get all the time at South Carolina, and it's just quite frankly not the case. And just across the board, like a very small percentage of your athletes fall into that category, but very much of the best basketball players are very average athletically.
Just moving back to the programming, and we'll go to positional differences in a second because I'm interested in that as well. Fixed resistance, you mentioned leg press. What's your thoughts on that? It's clearly it doesn't particularly matter. Load is load, but that again that may surprise people as well.
Yeah. It's a really easy, uh, like I'll say this too. So we have a lot of machines at South Carolina. Like when I was at Louisville, we didn't have a single machine in our entire weight room. Like everything was free weights, right? And then I came to South Carolina, and I would say over half of our weight room is our machines. And at first I was like, what is this? Like why do we have all these machines? And then I started training basketball players like really seriously, and I was like, oh, and now I understand why. Because it is such an easy way to load the system. It's really typically a pain-free movement for them. You don't have to worry about a technique per se. You don't have to worry about them loading their spine and kind of getting in. So if you're looking for just a way to get their lower body stronger, that's very, very low risk. Obviously, like a leg press is not going to be one of those exercises that really transfers to maybe necessarily being a better basketball player, but it is a way to just get load and to get your lower body stronger. And I think the most important thing for us is like, I want to be as low risk as possible. Like, what we do in this weight room should never interfere with what they've got to do on the basketball court. Because if it is, then, like, in my opinion, I should be fired. Like, what we do should never interfere with their skill development or their skill expression. So I think that's a really kind of low risk, high reward way to just load the lower body. Um, I have players that love to do that in season. It just feels better for them than performing a squatting movement, which is fine. They do squatting movements all the different time in sport and just in we train the squat pattern in various ways here. It doesn't always have to be loaded. So yeah, it's something I think I've changed my mind on over the last 6, 7 years is just um, load is load, and it doesn't have to come in the form of a back squat or a front squat or a trap bar.
Positional differences. In terms of assessments, do you assess all the girls the same, no matter what position they're in? And in terms of programming, I know you've got this kind of variation thought process going on, but is there any particular tracks that you push different positions down?
Yeah, for the most part, I assess them all the same. And from a programming standpoint too, right? Like probably 90 to 95% of it, like they all need similar things. But in that 5 to 10%, you know, our post players, I look at our connects on data, right? Like our guards are always going to have the highest load. They're always going to also have the highest movement variability in what they have to do on the court. Our posts are going to be more rim to rim, not a ton of movement. You know, we're one of the few programs that like really defend, so our posts do move and they run, but they also play a lot more overhead around the basket than our guards do. So there's definitely more of an overhead component. So simple programming switches in here, like if we're doing a pressing movement, they're going to be doing a lot more overhead pressing than our guards are. From a conditioning, I don't do a ton of um, like when people think of conditioning, I think of conditioning as in literally everything that we do is conditioning them to play basketball. Most people think of conditioning from an aerobic development standpoint. I'm looking at it from like a movement and capacity standpoint. Like our guards, especially our point guards, have to be the most well-conditioned players that we have on our roster. Like their capacity for changes of direction, accelerations, decelerations, like the amount of movements that they have to perform in a given practice or a game are much higher than a post player. So like they need to be their lower body has to be trained for that. So just in terms of like the volume of work that we're doing from a lower body standpoint, like and maybe some of the movements that we do, like I've got to be sure that those players are the best trained out of the entire group. Um, I would say those are probably the two biggest things, but for the most part, like they're fairly similar in what they need. And most of our players that we get honestly don't have a ton of weight room experience. So it's not complicated stuff, right? It's just I think you thinking about it differently in terms of just like your basic strength training. Like how can you take what you're already doing, what you know needs to happen, and then adding that kind of extra variety and sort of chaos and unfavorable aspect to it and making sure that they're actually prepared for what they've got to be able to do. And that comes from a really, really good understanding of what your head coach wants, your style of play, the positional needs. Like, what is the data actually telling you about what they've got to be able to do in a practice and in a game?
I've got one more question for you before I let you go, because I know you're busy. In terms of transfer from what you do in the weight room to what goes on the court, is that very much a subjective thing between you and the head coach and other members of staff? Or is there some method that you use to try to make sense of making sure that you're doing what you're doing the right way to make sure that transfers to the court?
It's a tough question. That's a tough one to answer because I think that is also part of what we struggle with sometimes is like sort of embracing the subjective and embracing that gray area because not everything can be quantified, nor should it be. Um, Obviously, I think for the most part, right, we track things and we like to have a record and see their improvement almost to cover our own asses. Hey, I'm doing my job, so and so got 5% better in these areas, right? But I mean, ultimately, what it comes down to is like, and I'm always taking the information that we're getting in here and relating it back to, okay, how do they feel on the court? Because ultimately, like, that's the measuring stick is how they feel on the court and how are they performing on the court. And there is a lot of subjectivity to that, but I think to do my job well, like, I've got to really understand basketball. I've got to watch it. I watch film. I'm at practice every day. Like I've got to understand in theory, like what's happening out there and what determines a successful or unsuccessful um, movement or whatever decision on offense and defense. So I think it comes back to like you've got to have something to show, right? Like you've got to be able to show their improvement in here. But like ultimately, it comes down to like, are they playing the game better? And there's conversations with the coaching staff, and that's feedback that I want too, because sometimes we think we're doing our jobs and we're doing a good job, but then the coach is like, but she can't do this and she's not doing that. So how can we do more? Like, how can you help her do that? And you've got to kind of take a step back, and sometimes it's stuff you don't think about, or sometimes it's stuff that you don't necessarily think is important, but it's important to them. So you better figure out a way to do it, right? Um, but yeah, it comes down to like, again, it's almost like that conversation about like when you want a player to gain or lose weight. Well, oh, I want this player to gain 10 pounds. Okay, but let's say she gains 10 pounds, but then feels like shit on the court and then can't get up and down. Like, what was that doing? Same thing in here. It's like, okay, we think we need to do X, but like in reality, how is this affecting their play? Do they feel good? Is Are they doing what coaches need them to do? And like, are they producing? Like, those have to be like your measuring stick. And then are they healthy? Obviously, are they healthy? Um, so yeah, I think there's a gray area. I don't know that any particular metric in the weight room can tell you like, oh yes, that player is going to be good. It's not that simple. So I think it's a lot. I think there's a lot of variables that come into play, and you've got to be okay. You've got to be okay know your value and knowing what we're doing is important, but ultimately it's not as important as basketball.
Yeah. Embrace the grey area.
Embrace it.
Embrace it.
There's a lot of it. A lot of it.
So if anyone wants to get to know a bit more about you, the stuff that you do down there, where's the best place for people to check you out? Instagram, Twitter?
I think
Wherever.
Instagram. Yeah. Yeah.
Instagram? Cool.
Sort of gravitated away from Twitter a little bit.
Same.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard world
It's a
out
tough
there.
place
But
to
yeah,
be.
Instagram is where I'm most active.
Yeah.
So yeah, Binetti 22 is my Instagram account. And that's an easy way for people to kind of see what I'm about, but also get in contact with me.
Nice. Brilliant. When you said change direction a few minutes ago, it reminded me the person that put me in touch with you or mentioned your name to me was Sophia Nymphius. And on the obviously change direction. Do you still keep in touch? Do you keep in touch?
Every once in a blue moon, it's
Okay.
probably been in the last year we have.
Okay.
Um, Not often, a little bit more in the earlier parts of my career, but every
Yeah.
once in a while we'll connect via social media or something like
Nice.
that.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah,
It's good
she's
to hear.
brilliant, obviously.
Yeah, she's great. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Right, I'm going to let you go and crack on with your day, but really appreciate you coming on for a second time. Great to keep in touch and keep up the great work. Keep going.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate
Yeah,
you and all you do for our profession as well, too. There's not
my
many like
pleasure.
you, so we
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Molly. Thank you very much. Speak soon.